Thank you for joining Sharebird's The Essential Go-to-Market Show, tips and strategies where we offer short video content and interview-style conversations with global product marketing leaders. I'm your host, Yasmin Turehi. Whether you're an early-stage startup or a public company, almost everyone struggles with the same question. What does it take to have a successful product launch? Today, I'll be talking to Ryan Goldman, the Global VP of Product Marketing at Soundcloud, and previously he was the VP of Product Marketing at Pendo, VP of Marketing at Sentry, Head of Marketing at SignalFx, and the Director of Product and Solutions Marketing at Cloudera. Welcome to the show, Ryan. Thanks
for having me, Yasmin. I'm happy to be here.
So you obviously have a ton of experience when it comes to product marketing. Can you tell us what are some of your top takeaways and learnings when it comes to go-to-market?
Sure. So the most important thing, and you probably hear this all the time if you're a product marketer, is the market comes first. Understand the needs and the audience and where they actually realize value. And it's not always going to be obvious, but trying to understand to where your differentiated value proposition comes from and how to articulate that in a way that they understand, that is the most important thing. It is square one. The product is there to serve that as opposed to the other way around. Trying to fit the product into the objectives of the user is more important than fitting the user into the objectives of the product.
Right. And so how do you approach that at SoundCloud, or maybe how have you approached that at some of the other companies that you worked with?
Yeah, it's a wildly different set of objectives and approaches when it comes to B2C versus B2B. So most of my experience is in B2B, and usually we work from a hypothesis. In B2B, we say, okay, we have some sense of the product roadmap. We have some sense of where we believe we're driving operational value for the user, which is typically not an individual. It's an organization, or at least a group within an organization. And we stress test it. Basically, we go out and we speak to our customers, we speak to our prospects, and we start to understand, where do you find value in this? Is this something that you'd be willing to adopt? And then most importantly, why? And we derive that positioning and that value articulation from that why insight. Sometimes it falls flat, sometimes it goes gangbusters, and you have to make sure that that first positive sentiment is actually representative and not just a false signal of enthusiasm. On the consumer side, it's a little bit different because we're talking about individuals for the most part. And the sample for any cohort is not easily gathered from just a couple of conversations or a couple of pitches. You also don't necessarily have a sales organization to work with. And so a lot of the work comes from research. So being able to actually write up the right questions to understand how to cohort the market and how to drive deeper insights so that you can shrink the segment down to really where the signal is, that's the most important thing. So the second most important idea for being a product marketer is shrink the segment. Don't try and get it as big as possible. One of the mistakes that startups make is they think that they can sell to everyone, and they say their TAM is the entire space, and it's usually a very small piece of that, and getting alignment to that small piece is key. It's where momentum comes from and velocity.
Right. And Ryan, can you talk to us a little bit about team structure? How does that work at SoundCloud, maybe as an example, or some of the other companies that you've worked with? How do you set the right team structure for an upcoming launch? And every company has like their own launch schedule. Some create launches every day, some every quarter, some every year. So what has it been like working at SoundCloud? And how do you kind of create the team structure for the different types of launches?
Yeah, so at a place like SoundCloud, where we're often talking about the consumer, and I failed to mention that last part of the conversation, the way you get that insight is from surveys. A lot of the time, like really asking great questions in a survey and being able to go from there. So the way you get that structure for consumer is to partner with the right folks internally. And more so than in B2B, in a place like SoundCloud, it's all about brands. Brand plays a disproportionately large role in being able to launch effectively. Because when it comes down to it, chalking it up to the vibe, which a lot of like modern marketers do, especially on the consumer side, is not enough. It really does come from, how do we tie our complete awareness, favorability, and willingness to try to our brand, supported by this new feature or product launch, as opposed to the other way around. It's not around, is this product or this feature simply relevant to me? But more importantly, does it evolve how people understand and how they're willing to spend their time and their money with your brand as well as your platform? So being able to build a go-to-market that ties in not only, hey, feature relevance, alignment, value proposition, but also brand proposition and evolution of brand proposition, and also some of the channels that are probably very specific to a consumer launch, like social media. That's really important because those are the ways we speak to those audiences. They're not just paying attention when we launch, they're paying attention all the time. And so that's really key on the B2C brand product marketing launch strategy. On the B2B side, we tend to focus on, okay, the sales team needs to be enabled. They're the first line of defense because everyone knows the best way to introduce new features and new products is to your existing users. So being able to use that as leverage to understand not how this fits, but also where the adoption is going to come from, super key. Then as well, customer success, really being able to think like, is this part of the flywheel or is this a new experience? How do we enable the customer success team or even take feedback from the customer success team to get a sense of, okay, is there a lifetime value here? Does this actually change the trajectory of adoption and ultimately entrenchment with our platform, with our product, so that there is ongoing lifetime value? How do we basically measure our relationship and value our relationship with the customer differently because of this new feature, this new launch? Have we aligned it to not only something that the user needs, but also differentiation from the rest of the market? For B2B, especially with SaaS, being able to drive differentiation and durable differentiation is a big part of how product marketing becomes successful.
Right. And it's so interesting because not many people have the background that you do with B2B as well as B2C. And while there's like a lot of overlap, there's also a lot of differences the teams that you're working with. So thank you for that. So Ryan, can you talk to us about what it was like this last year as a product marketer? I imagine that a lot of teams went remote. I'm not sure if yours did. I imagine they did. But yeah, what was that like? How did you manage the go-to-market process with like a fully remote team?
Yeah, so I lucked out a little bit. So when I joined SoundCloud, it was during the pandemic, and it actually opened some interesting doors for me because, so as Yasmin knows, I'm based in the Bay Area. SoundCloud does not have an office in the Bay Area. So I think I am one of very few among the 500 employees who doesn't align directly to an office. As a matter of fact, I'm calling in from my first day in the Los Angeles office ever. So I was lucky to even have the conversation to be considered in the first place. That said, the product marketing team at SoundCloud is pretty well distributed to begin with. We have someone in Los Angeles, someone in New York. A lot of our stakeholders on the product side are based in Berlin, as well as other stakeholders in London. And so the culture of collaboration across offices and time zones was already there. And the big launch that we were working towards, SoundCloud's fan-powered royalty, was already in process. My role there was relatively easy in that, like, I came in as the most senior product marketer, and I was able to bring in a lot of my experience from B2B to be like, okay, we're doing a great job in terms of how we articulate the brand proposition, but the ongoing differentiation and the alignment to multiple audiences that we actually want to be able to launch to over time needs to improve. And so being able to do that remotely was not as difficult as it might have been if I were joining or had been in the same office as everybody else, because you have to like politic and have meetings with each individual stakeholder and try and convince them and change their minds. There already was a tendency towards, okay, you're on the Zoom screen. As long as the agenda is in place, the argument in terms of like the case is well articulated and it's been made for the person you're trying to partner with, for the part of the team you're trying to influence. That is really key. Product marketers tend to think of, okay, if I've nailed the market, then I'm good. If I've nailed the product, then I'm good. But a lot of the time, the argument, the case, the documentation that you have to create to actually precede the conversation, whether it's live or remote, it still needs to be there. Like, have a meeting with an objective, be able to articulate what you want to get out of it before you even start it. And that was a real key for me during this crazy time where we're all speaking over Zoom and Google and Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think it's been so interesting to hear different people's perspective on how they were able to manage the kind of remote aspect of go-to-market, because it's so hard as it is. Like, I think, like you mentioned, in some cases, like not dealing with the kind of politics or not dealing with the nuances and the complexities of human relationships is actually in some ways good. And then in other ways, like being able to create buy-in and being able to create feedback loops with the right stakeholders is also just difficult remotely. So thank you for that. And
yeah, product marketing's responsibility is to digest people's insights. You don't necessarily follow one stakeholder's direction. You take it in, you understand it, you try and get to the root cause, like the thing that's actually most valuable, and then inform your thinking for your next audience, your next partner from there.
So Ryan, what are your last takeaways? What do you want to tell our audience? A lot of them may be aspiring product marketers or new product marketers, or maybe even veteran product marketers. What's sort of like your main kind of takeaway?
Gosh, so when it comes to product marketing, the organization's maturity and its stage, as well as the market's maturity and stage, is important. Keep it in mind. I have been victim to this in my own career, but I've also heard it a lot from other product marketers that, the things that worked, the approaches that I used, the frameworks that I adopted in past roles just don't seem to work in my new role. It's not because those frameworks are bad and those approaches are bad. You just have to keep in mind who your audience is, both internal and external. And so really being able to speak the language of your audience, of your partners, is important. It's something that I'm learning as I make this transition still from B2B to consumer product marketing. It's not just about speaking the same language as the customer. A lot of times it's being able to understand and speak the same language as the people with whom you work. And it's really evident as we can transition from remote into the office because, gosh, relationships are key, understanding politics and nuance is key, but also knowing the stage of the organization and what's at stake and what level of readiness and comprehension they have of product marketing is also really important. So keep that in mind.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. And where can people find you?
Oh gosh. So I live in Oakland. Come and knock on my door whenever you like. But the best way to find me is on LinkedIn /Ryan Goldman. Come say hello, drop me a note, and I'll be sure to respond.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And stay tuned for upcoming shows with product marketing leaders from startups to public companies as they share some of their best tips and strategies on go-to-market. And send us a note. Tell us what you learned. Tag the show, tag Sharebird, tag Ryan, and we'd love to hear from you. For those of you who are looking for more material on go-to-market, you can check out my book, Product Marketing Debunked, which is on Amazon, and my new book, which is coming out soon. Details in the bio.